So how have y'all been?
Good. This is the outtake stuff that we don't air very often. But very often, there's been times I put a few things out, but we like to have fun.
Usually gets me doing stuff like that, or
Yeah.
Meet the Pressers with Matt Mallory and Klint Macro. Brought to you by Public Safety and Education and the Trigger Pressers Union.
Meet the Pressers is brought to you by Mantis X. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training. Makers of CERT training products. Saber Red. Saber Red has been making men and women cry since 1975. Meet the Pressers is also brought to you by these fine companies, shows, and organizations. Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome to Meet the Pressers. This is Matt Mallory and my good, awesome co-host, Klint Macro. And this is a safe place to talk about political activism, training, firearms, gear, gadgets, all that fun stuff. And Klint's going to introduce our guest. So Klint, take it away.
Our very special guest today is someone that I can't believe he hasn't been on the show before. Barret Kendrick has been a mentor of mine and someone that I've worked with a lot over the years through ICE training. He's an educator from down in Louisiana, but he travels the country. He's a very prolific trainer. And he also has his own company, which is very successful in its own right, called Bearco. So Barret, thank you for being on the show. Oh, he's also the co-host of PDN Training Talk, right? Training Talk.
That's right. Training Talk show.
Yeah, and also one of the founding PDN Training Tour instructors too. So we'll probably talk about the PDN Training Tour. But welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be on, man. It's I've known y'all for so long, and we've talked about this in the past, but somehow it hasn't happened until now. So I'm glad to be on tonight. Thank y'all for having me.
All those busy schedules.
Yeah, well, that's true. Derek came on the show. I think he might have been like maybe one of our first guests back when we really didn't know what we were doing. Not that I think we know what we're doing now, but we have a lot more fun now, I think.
Make it till you make it.
I'm sure your show probably goes off with less hiccups than ours does.
Yeah, well, we record it, so we don't have to deal with the live issues. Although Matt does a live show with Charlie from Riding Shotgun and Charlie, and I'm sure Riding Shotgun with Charlie, and I'm sure he has some stories to tell about the live. Well, we did a live thing at SHOT Show this year that was we completely crapped the bed on it. It was pretty bad.
Well, and that's you kind of start to accept the fact that there's just going to be technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Last month, though, the Training Talk show, our technical difficulty was we couldn't even go live because the YouTube decided to put a ban on going live. It's temporary.
Yeah. The live YouTube has been very problematic. Luckily, because we record this and we don't have some of the compliance issues that folks do when they do the live show.
And to that note too, just to put it out there, now's a good time to mention that we're going to be recording all of our interviews and our one live a day at SHOT Show 2025 from the Otis booth. So Otis has a little studio there, so we're going to be recording there, so everybody can check out the interviews that we do at SHOT Show, all the reviews, product reviews, and individual interviews, as well as the live shows on a daily basis from the Otis booth at SHOT Show.
We'll have to put makeup on with those proprietary round patches with all the holes in it. You know the Otis patches, and then it gets around the board. Yeah, we'll have to put makeup on with that.
There you go.
There's another video we'll do for Otis.
Sounds like fun. Sounds like fun.
So you're in Louisiana, although I got to be honest, I didn't know that when I first met you because you don't sound like I think someone from Louisiana should sound like.
Right? It's weird. You could throw a dart at the map in Louisiana, and people are going to sound different everywhere the dart goes. You go to the north and it's like, ooh, they're not from Louisiana. And you go to New Orleans, like, I don't talk anything like them. Wow. I'm kind of, I guess I fall in the central area of it. It's, I remember growing up, everybody used to accuse me of, oh, man, you must be from Mississippi. And that's what they would hear. And I got family from Mississippi, so there's probably truth in that. But then I would go to Mississippi and they're like, oh, listen to that dude's dialect. So, but no, they sound different all over the place. And I don't know, maybe I don't sound like I'm from Louisiana.
Well, I suppose that's the case everywhere you go. You just have to have a refined palate to be able to tell the dialects. So tell us your story. Like, what got you into training, man? I know you've been an educator for a very long time, but I think you're younger than me, aren't you? How old are you?
I think I'm going to be 46 here in May.
Oh yeah, you're
Ooh,
younger than me. Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah, you're
a
young.
little bit younger.
I didn't
Yeah.
realize I was younger than you.
Yeah, I
figured,
always thought you were a little older because you talk smarter than I do.
Oh, I don't know. Oh. I've been working around firearms. Really, I guess I first started professionally working around guns back in the 90s, working at a gun range. And
Nice.
when I say that, it was kind of loose. I worked at a gun range for a couple of years, and it was more shotgun than anything. But what it did was kind of whet my palate to, I liked bringing people out to the range, teaching them about guns, teaching them about firearm safety, and teaching them, how to shoot, trap, and skeet and stuff. And kind of transitioned over from that over into the personal defense side of things. And really, it started out, I started taking a lot of classes, training with a bunch of different instructors, putting a lot of resources into it. And, I was already always taking people to the range, but all of a sudden, what I was teaching them started to evolve and develop. And eventually I realized that I was sharing enough information that I probably ought to, start charging for it. And so that's really how the company got started. And it's,
Awesome.
I officially launched, I think in June was my first class in 2009. And so I'll make 15 years this summer. And, it's been a blessing since then.
Awesome.
I can't imagine the class that I taught 15 years ago. It's
Right.
definitely evolved a bunch since then. I've gained a lot of knowledge, gained a lot of information and experience, but yeah, I've had the ability to bounce around, do a lot of instructor development around the country, teach a lot of different students, work with a lot of different
Nice.
backgrounds and stuff, and absolutely love doing it.
So to that avail, and Klint and I are proponents, and I know you are as well, but give us a little hint as far as other professional development that you do on an annual basis or that you try to do. I try to put about 100 hours under other instructors where I'm a student in their class. Some years don't make that because of, training schedules, but, I take a section out to make sure that I am under other instructors to try to make sure I brush off the cobwebs, learn a new way to say it, maybe a new thing like red dot sights when they first come out, how they integrate into handguns, etc. So give us a little idea on stuff like that. Do you do that? Do you go around and take classes from other instructors to keep your skills up to peak?
I do. No, absolutely do. I really always have. And I diversify what I do a lot. So it's really not
Smart.
all just firearms based or not just handgun, not just rifle, but I really try to branch out and gain different types of information. For instance, workshop that I just signed up for just about the psychology behind shooters and, active shooting events and whether they, have a distraught childhood or,
Wow.
somebody that has some sort of mental illness like schizophrenia or something. So I really try to learn all kind of information. And so whether it be, pepper spray or psychology with something, neurology, or firearms based, I definitely continue to develop and evolve my education. I think it was last year, went through the Force Science Institute's
Yes.
40-hour, force analyst certification.
Yep.
I'm pretty positive that I'm going to sign up for their 18-week advanced force science certification, this coming year. And that one's more like a college level class that's kind of condensed down to one semester, or a college level program condensed down to one semester. But really, definitely, continue to stay involved with learning more and more.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. Yep.
that one's on my bucket list.
Yeah, mine too.
It's a
definitely on
good
my list.
course. It's really, I was surprised of how much of the information was already up here. They've got different ways of saying things, but a lot of the human performance factors, I've really been teaching and learning about, since at least back in 2010. And so, a lot of it, a lot of the information, I'm already familiar with, I'm already teaching. There's, as mentioned, there's different ways of saying it. But I definitely picked up on some, some new stuff in the course. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, we had Dr. Artwalt on the show, Alexis Artwalt. She was a adjunct instructor there and wrote a couple books. But yeah, I learned more about that. Actually, first learned about it maybe from you in one of the instructor development classes with Rob. Maybe it's the first time I heard about it years ago. Or maybe it was from Jamie Onion, but definitely something I've been looking into. I really try to do, I'm a disciple of Rob's teachings, and that's kind of like the kung fu that I've kind of chose to follow. you become like a Baptist or a Methodist or, you know, whatever. And the Baptists clap on 2 and 4 and the Methodists on 1 and 3 and Episcopalians just don't clap at all. But I kind of like drank his Kool-Aid. So I always try to do an ICE or a counter ambush style class once a year. You know, there's been times I've worked with Rob or with Alessandro or, you know, some of the other guys. But then I also try to branch out and see what else is going on. And oftentimes I'll be like, oh, hey, that's something I never thought of, or another way to approach it, or, nah, I don't buy into that. You know, so it's good to keep your knife sharp, but broaden it. So something we always talk about is, hey, what's something you used to teach you don't teach anymore? So I'm going to ask you, what's something you used to teach that you found a better way, or you realized maybe it was snake oil or something?
You know, it's, I mean, I guess if you go back in my early days of teaching, because I had a lot of influence with instructors that had more overseas experience and stuff, I think the context of what I was teaching was really kind of outside of the scope of personal defense. So that was definitely a big evolution, you know, from early on. But man, there's been so many things. You know, I've had a concealed carry permit. I don't know, probably 20 years or so, you know, close to 20 years. And, you know, I've carried a firearm almost every single day, you know, since then. But to kind of give you an idea of, you know, knowledge jumps. I mean, my go-to, you know, dedicated concealed carry handgun when I first got my concealed carry permit was a full-size 1911, you know, Kimber TLE Custom 2 or something like that. You know, I'm the guy that made excuses for it. Well, as long as I use these Chip McCormick magazines and as long as I keep it clean and, you know, as long as I talk to it ahead of time, it's going to run fine, right?
As long as I keep it warm, yeah.
You got to rub it.
You know, and I was a big proponent of you know, 45 because it was bigger, right? And then 40 because law enforcement used it, so why not? And you know, even in something like that where I started to, you know, get a much broader understanding of the information and the science behind it, whereas I, you know, evolved and even, you know, into something like 9mm. And you know, have an understanding into the backup of why behind it. But yeah, I mean, my first class with Rob was in 2010. It was 2010. And really, I was just on a journey of learning more information. And I was kind of jumping into different instructor classes. And I really had never heard of Rob Pincus, but I somehow came across his instructor course online. You know, and a prerequisite was the in-person, the student course. And there just happened to be one over in the Florida Panhandle at the time. And so I quickly kind of jumped into the 2-day course. And I mean, there was a ton of light bulb moments, you know, that went off. And I'd already been teaching at that point, and had been teaching a good bit at that point, you know, and trained with a bunch of different instructors, but a tremendous amount of light bulb moments went off during that course. And so, I mean, there were evolutions just simply in that class, you know, and it wasn't necessarily the way I hold the gun or, you know, necessarily in how I shot the gun, just a lot of the underlying concepts and principles of why we do certain things.
Yeah, I think I discovered him in 2013, and maybe I might have hosted him in 13 or 14, but it was right around that time. Definitely, it spoke to me. The methodology spoke to me. It's like, oh, that makes sense. But so you carried a 1911. So what was your first carry gun there, Matt? Was it an old service revolver back from
No, actually, it was a pocket gun, and I still have it. A Keltec P3AT, a little 380.
Oh, see, my first carry gun. Now I was into guns for a while, but I lived in California, so I just couldn't legally carry there.
You posted pictures on the wall of them.
Yeah, well, I was one of those guys. The only time I would shoot, I'd go to the range, and so I had like my drop leg 6000 series, and I was wearing plate carriers. But to be honest, at the time, it was more about when the balloon went up, whatever the hell that means. It was all about I have to get out of Dodge. Like, how do we get out of the city? So it wasn't completely out of context at all. But my first carry gun was a Para Ordnance Warthog. You know, small frame 1911 double stack, and it was a single shot gun, man. I could not get that thing to work, so I finally sold it. There's very few guns that I've sold in my adult years. I lost a bunch in my younger years when I was financially, you know, deprived. But yeah, I couldn't get it to work, so I don't even want it in my house. Got rid of it. And of course, realized how damn complex it was, and it was really kind of a silly gun to carry. But
right,
that's pretty much it.
You know, if you feel deprived, though, you could always just go to Chicago and denounce your citizenship, and you can get a gun, and you know, they'll let you keep it, and
They'll give me a T-shirt too.
T-shirt,
T-shirt and a gift card.
and a gift card, and probably college and a house and food.
Yeah, the Babylon Bee today had an article, and I'm paraphrasing, but the headline was illegal immigrants were told that when they run out of gift cards, then they can go ahead and just directly steal from the citizens.
Wow,
that was just kind of funny.
That's like the and I mean it's Babylon Bee, of course, right?
Yeah.
But then you look at like Canada, and they're like, yeah, the best way to combat not getting attacked is just leave your keys out.
Yep. Don't confront them. You'll be charged. Just let them do what they would take. Let them take what they want to take.
Yeah, that's a damn shame right there.
I think there's a book that covers that. It's like when evil's called good and good's called evil.
Oh, there is a book. Yeah. You're a spiritual man, Barret, aren't you?
What's that?
You're a spiritual man, aren't you?
Oh yeah, I got one of those books right here.
Yeah, we talk about that on this show. We have no problem with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Yeah, so we'll probably come back to that at some point. But the question I had for you is, Louisiana recently went constitutional carry, right?
Permitless carry.
Permitless carry.
Permitless.
Yes.
Permitless. So were you involved in that process at all with any lobbying? Because I know you do some of that too at the state level.
I was, I've, in fact, I think I just saw the anniversary come up. I have been a board member of the Louisiana Shooting Association for 8 years, and don't quote me on that, or it's live, so quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure it was 8 years. I saw the anniversary, but it's been several years. Through that time, most of my involvement with the organization has been at the legislative level. I have had the opportunity to testify on countless pieces of legislation, for stuff, against stuff. I have inspired, I've helped write, or I've personally written, some of the things that have become law, co-written and whatnot. And so with the permitless carry, I do a lot of concealed carry, in Louisiana, and have worked with thousands of students. And so, a lot of people are like, oh, isn't that going to hurt your business? I'm like, well, definitely it's going to hurt the concealed carry side. You're going to see less people taking a concealed carry class, but I do support it, because I believe that it's silly that you have to, especially in Louisiana, because it is a constitutional protection to be able to open carry a firearm in Louisiana. And when I'm saying firearm, like you can open carry a handgun, you can open carry, a crack barrel shotgun, you can open carry an AR-15, and there's limitations and firearm free zones and that kind of stuff. But that is constitutionally protected in Louisiana, but concealed carry is seen as a privilege. And I'm like, wait, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, that I can walk around with a gun, but the fact that I'm cold and want to put a jacket on, now all of a sudden I got to take a class. I've got to go get permission from the state. I've got to pay for that permission. I've got to go through the background check, and I have to continue to do this every 5 years. And so I've always felt that was silly anyway, but I'm definitely, pro constitutional carry, and I did support our permitless carry bill. I was there to testify on it in the House committee to be able to help that get through for a full House vote. And I'm glad that, that it went into effect. And so starting July 4th, 18 and up in Louisiana, as long as they're not a prohibited individual, will be allowed to carry that firearm concealed without the concealed carry permit. Which I think is, it's a great thing. And before you go there, one thing I said, right? Concealed carry training goes down, but the interest in training goes up, because people who don't have training usually aren't carrying firearms. They realize that it's dangerous. They realize that it's unsafe. They don't want to hurt themselves. They don't want to hurt somebody else. So while they don't go take the state mandated class, they do typically go out and get training before carrying the gun.
Well, I mean, as an instructor that comes from a state that does have a permit or a license process, but there's zero training requirement for it, I've never had a problem with getting enough clients to fill up classes and pay my bills. And I think, having had the opportunity recently to work with a lot of other businesses in different states that have mandatory training, I think the quality of my student was much higher because there was much more want to be there, not just a need to be there, but a want to be there.
Yes. Yeah, definitely so.
I've and kind of to that thought process here in New York with the new 18 hours that they've required, I'm seeing a lot more people come for private lessons, come back for more advanced training. I do a low light, no light class that I think I had 6 or 8 students in that class, the last one I did. So yeah, so you're right in that sense where people are realizing, and I'll start out the 18-hour class with like, who said to themselves, what the heck is he going to teach me in 18 hours? And then, everybody's hand goes up. And at the end of the class, I go, who thinks they know everything after 18 hours? And no hands go up. Right. Yeah. And then I give them the list of classes that I offer.
Well, and Matt, you're one of the kind of instructors, I think the three of us are in regards to, we try to give people the best value for what they're paying for and the time they're with us. And we show that we want to be their mentor. We want to be their guy, and we want to help them down that road to be better, well-regulated, to defend themselves. So too often the mistake I see, especially in states where there is mandatory training, where the minimum requirement becomes the industry standard, it just becomes about the plastic card class, and it's just the puppy mill. And when I say puppy mill, they might be meeting the requirement and giving a quality thing, but they just do the bare minimum, and it's like, oh, next class, oh, next class. Yeah. It's amazing how often I talk to other businesses, other trainers, and say, hey, are you regularly like checking in with and communicating with your client base that you've had take classes? And like, man, you're missing out on such a great opportunity to bring them back and enrich their lives, and enrich your pocketbook too, and get some more business.
So you had mentioned a couple times permitless carry versus constitutional carry, and they're totally drastically different things. So what is your views on that, Barret, as far as the difference between the two of them? What is one versus the other? And then Klint and I can chime in too, as far as
certainly. So and when I look at constitutional carry, what I look at is, the state actually decided to put it on the ballot, take a vote, and write it into the Constitution that it is a protection. It is not, we don't need permission from the state to be able to do it. And that's how firearms are in Louisiana. In fact, I don't know, how it rates now, but a few years ago, Louisiana passed one of the most strict, most conservative or liberal, firearm-based laws throughout the entire country. In that sense, is that we put so much protection and put it on the ballot, and voters chose to add language that, really anything that is going to be regulated on firearms inside the state of Louisiana has to, pass the strict scrutiny clause, right? The highest level of, requiring, really judges sign off to be able to show that it's in the best interest of the public to be able to, to pass that anti-gun law in our case. Now, in practice, we know that that's not the case, right? A lot of things are already on the books that would never hold up to strict scrutiny, especially not under the, the new rulings that we have from the Supreme Court, but, they exist. And so what Louisiana did is, instead, the legislators put it in our statutes. It says, well, as long as you're not a prohibited individual, you can conceal carry, but, you're still restricted into these kinds of places, and that privilege can still be taken away from you if you don't do things like, notify law enforcement that you're carrying a gun, if you end up in the context of a traffic stop or something like that, or if you, get under the influence of alcohol or controlled dangerous substance, you lose that privilege and that kind of stuff.
Well, we have court precedent now from a federal judge that says even illegal aliens can have Second Amendment rights. So that kind of negates any requirement in all 50. I think I'm waiting for that to be cited in a case where we can use it in our favor. But
that's interesting the way you said that. I usually say, and I agree with that they, if the state doesn't step in and say, you can do anything, it's Second Amendment right, whatever, we're not going to control it. I usually look at that as constitutional. And then permitless is the state saying, well, you don't need a permit, but you can't carry here, you got to be this age, you can't have it concealed, whatever. They still have some restrictions, right? So that's seems
and they have the ability to kind of add more restrictions without going back to the voters.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, too often the legislature, the elected officials, the elected class, whoever, they don't pay attention to the damn rules anyhow.
Yeah.
The right of the people or the citizen to defend themselves in the state shall not be questioned, is what Article 1, Section 21 in Pennsylvania says. You don't even question it. Nope, right. Don't even question it. But too often that falls on a deaf ear. And our legislators they actually swear an oath to obey, not just uphold, but to obey the Constitution, which
Tarred and feathered? Is that the?
yeah, well, yeah, maybe one day, who knows?
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't have to come to that. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into my state's worse than yours, because Matt will always win on that one. At least right now. I guess I'm one bad election cycle from being maybe
New
worse.
York's like, oh, y'all want us to have permits? Cool. Guess watch this.
They're in a race, man. They're in a race. Cuomo with the SAFE Act in 2013, and then everybody picked up after that. It's just gone downhill. Bruin has helped some, but so what are your guys' thoughts on the Second Amendment and people? We had the live show with Charlie the other night, and in that somebody had popped on there and said, well, if you're for the Second Amendment, then you have to be for even illegals coming into the country being able to have guns and defend themselves. And
well, that's interesting, and I'm going to jump on that because I just wrote a little piece on that in the Firearms Owners Against Crime Institute newsletter, because I talked a lot about that court decision, and I believe that the founders' intent was that goes for everybody, because first off, the right to defend yourself is natural born. It's self-evident. Every animal has that right to defend themselves.
Yep.
So there's that. But we've always had non-citizens on the dirt. And a matter of fact, technically, not when they wrote that, but there's been like Second Amendment-ish types of protections around for a long time. Matter of fact, Article 1, Section 21 in Pennsylvania predates the U.S. Constitution. So at that time, there wasn't even technically a country while they had their Article 5, their Constitutional Convention, where they took out the Articles of Confederation. So I think that it was their intent that everybody has that right.
Well, it's just like the First Amendment, right?
Well, I mean, that gets complex now when you're talking about voting and stuff, because I don't think that illegals should vote. I think a citizen should only vote. Yeah. If that's the case, then my son should be able to vote. Mm-hmm. And imagine what a mess it would be if you'd let 15-year-olds vote.
Well, women, they should be able to vote. Blacks, right?
Right.
I mean, at some point that was in there.
Yeah, at some point, yeah.
Right.
But anyhow, that's my feeling on it, and that's my interpretation. But if you see, a lot of times people will think of the old founding fathers, which were all younger guys, most of them. Benjamin Franklin was definitely the oldest. Yeah. But if you read the Federalist Papers and you read the arguments that go back and forth, you can really get an idea of their thought process at the time and the context. And believe it or not, I think a lot of anti-gun people take stuff a lot out of context.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So with that said, every town, I'm sure, is making predictions. What are your feelings? Do you think when the permitless carry happens in Louisiana, are there going to be bloodbaths in the streets and crime going to just jump out the window because people
here's the good thing, and obviously I talked about this when I was testifying about it. It's like, guys, we're not carving a path here. We're trying to be number 28 in states. So we've got kind of the track record that already exists with 27 other states, and it just obviously that's not seen. We don't see all of a sudden bloodbaths just happening, and it's it's because the criminals have always been carrying. So it's not like more criminals are going to start carrying; they're already carrying guns. Right. That's proven every single day. In the city of New Orleans, on how many people are getting arrested for firearms and how many different shootings happen, or just how much gunfire happens in the street or whatever. It doesn't really matter, right? The criminals have always been carrying guns. And the non-criminal element, the typical responsible person, is very reserved when it comes to using firearms against other human beings. And we know that because the data has always backed that up, where there's millions of gun uses. It depends on what data you look at, but you can call it 1 million, you can call it 4 million, but there's a lot of gun uses every single year. And most of those, the largest majority of those, do not result in anyone firing a gun. Yeah. And generally speaking, they legally would have been justified to do so, but yet they don't fire the firearm because people use a lot of reservations when it comes to, harming others, especially with guns.
Well, being armed is enough in many cases. That's something we should never count on. But you can't discount it when you look at that data. I mean, the CDC data that was squelched, which is kind of gray because there's a big wide window there. But if you cut their estimate in half and then divide it by 365, it's thousands of people every day. Yeah. Thousands of people every day defend themselves successfully without pressing the trigger.
They don't want that info out there. They don't want that.
The founding fathers wanted to conceal. It's self-evident because if you look at all the paintings you don't see guns on them. And if you look really close, sometimes you can see like George
Bulge.
Washington's printing a little bit. So you know that the gun is on them. They just covered it up with their clothing. So the founding fathers concealed carry for sure.
Well, and I think the Bruin decision really, the Bruin decision really should go back. You know, what was
To
the
the paintings.
standing? Yeah, they didn't have that in any of the documentation as far as open or concealed. The two areas that I think any state's gonna have a hard time is with the training. I haven't seen a lot of lawsuits when it came to the training as far as like New York State's 18 hours. I don't think that's going to be challenged, or if it is challenged, I don't necessarily think the Supreme Court, because well regulated, well trained. I think that you know that they want people to be trained, even though it wasn't written back then other than well regulated, and people can change that or interpret that however they want. And then the other thing is inside saloons, which current day saloons are bars, right? So can you carry, back then they couldn't, they'd have to disarm before they went into a bar because people would get a little
No, saloon has to have dancing girls with the fluffy dress. You got to have dancing girls, otherwise it's not a saloon. They probably have those in the French Quarter, right?
In the upstairs private area.
The brothels down there.
Yeah, that's a saloon, right?
Yeah, that's a saloon. You know, what we have is bars.
Yeah, bars are.
Here's
totally
an interesting piece of data about Louisiana.
Yeah,
Covington, where I live, was the only courthouse that I've ever heard of, and I've always been told it's been the only courthouse, but the only courthouse in the entire United States that actually had a bar in it.
Oh, no kidding.
really interesting.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
it's a lot of those
buildings a couple of times, and that bar is now since closed. You know, but
now was it there for the court, or it just happened to be there? Okay,
no, it was for the people in the court. You know, after they finished, they could go over to the bar.
Well, I mean, you know, the tavern was like the local gathering place in many communities. So, like, if you think back then, before television, before movies, before phones and stuff, it would make sense that there would be a gathering place where people would socialize. And if they just happen to serve libations because the water sucked, you know, that's the other thing too. People drank alcohol all the time because their water was really poor quality. If they drank water, they'd die. So people were hammered all the time.
It's the new norm.
That's fun. Yeah, there's a bar in the court. That's pretty cool. Do the courts allow you? Can you go to court and they will lock up your firearm for you when you go into court in Louisiana?
No,
that's not a thing.
No, in fact, I mean that's the courthouse to me is, and at least local to me, is the most strict place when it comes to weapons that I've ever seen around the country.
Really?
I mean, this is the only place that will not allow me to carry a flashlight. I literally I can dumb it down to, you know, to the smallest little light, and it's still, they're like, you can't bring that in here. I'm like, it's a flashlight.
Could you have a big light at least?
You know, so it's the exact opposite. All weapons are banned. And I mean, I understand what the sheriff department's doing. You know, obviously they get the prisoners coming in and out. They're trying to, you know, prevent and you know, any sort of incident where weapons are changing hands to the wrong people. But
I mean,
they're pretty freaking strict.
TSA will let you fly with a flashlight.
Oh yeah, no, and I've been in different government buildings and military institutions and concert venues and everything else, and I've never had a problem with a flashlight. They gave me issues with a tourniquet.
Yeah, the windlass is an impact device, I've been told.
Wow.
Yeah, I was running late and I almost missed the plane, and I had my leg cuff on, and TSA grabbed me and like beep beep beep. I'm like, oh, it's my leg cuff, and I went down to reach it. They're like, stop, sir. I took it off, and the one guy opened up the tourniquet. He looked at it. He said, what is this? And this was the wrong thing to say.
Oh no.
I said, it's a tourniquet. Don't you guys know about safety?
Damn.
That was not what I should have said.
I can picture after you said that, it's like the Monsters Inc. show with the sock in the back of the guy's head. 44 code 22, and then they start shaving you, right?
Well, I just all of a sudden realized what came out of my mouth, and I thought, okay, I'm going to miss my flight, and now who am I going to call?
Cavity.
Because I'm going to have to call somebody. Yeah,
but like bend over, assume the position.
Yeah, well, anyhow, I ultimately did make my flight, but they were calling me on the thing as I was running down the hall. But luckily the supervisor was nice enough to do this to me, and he let me go. But yeah, it was tourniquet. It's windlass. Like is this an impact device?
They've taken my tactical pens, so now I just take it out of my pocket and put it in my bag, so they X-ray it. It looks like a regular pen.
It looks like a regular pen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I've heard stories where people that train those guys, where they like try to sneak stuff in just for like quality control. Actually, he was on our show, Andy Landers. He said you'd be very surprised at how often the test guys get stuff through there.
No, it's not, I mean, there's data on it, right? And so it's not even like I heard it from this guy. There's at least 2 different times where the Department of Homeland Security has tested TSA to see what they could get through. And the first time, I think it was 2015 or 2016, something like that, 95% of the time they were able to sneak the weapons past. And it was real guns and fake bombs. 95% of the time they were successful. And then they were evaluated again like 2 years later, and it was still like 70-something% of the time.
Well, it's the theater of health and safety. That's what it's all about control.
I mean, that's what security always is. Because I mean, look, at the end of the day, they're giving you flack about being able to carry with a tourniquet because of the windlass could be an impact device, and yet you can fly with a screwdriver as long as it's under 6 inches.
Yeah.
Right.
So it kind of goes back. I remember a buddy of mine, was flying out years ago, and this was all the stuff's happening, with TSA and all this, and and he takes a picture of the lady next to him knitting with the big knitting needles on the airplane. I mean, security's a fallacy.
Yeah, I can't have my
as
pen.
long as you have a human element involved, it's always going to be that case.
Well, bad guys can weaponize anything. I mean,
right.
Well,
I mean, in our defenses class, we talk about, improvised defensive tools in case you are somewhere you have nothing. So, yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely. I mean, you get everything taken away from you at TSA, then you go sit down at the steakhouse and they give you a steak knife.
Yeah. Well, Matt's got really long arms, so his hands and his fists are like a lethal weapon. You should be registered, Matt.
No, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you are, you need to be prepared because you're the only one.
Well, speaking of
prepared to protect yourself and other people you care about.
Amen. Speaking of fake bombs, quick story. Last spring I flew down to Missouri to do my force on force class for Kevin Dixie at his Train and Learn, and I flew from Syracuse there with a fake bomb, and they didn't stop me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd say that on the air.
What was it that joke you just told? Because it was a real bomb.
No, it wasn't. No, it was fake.
Oh, okay.
It was fake.
For the class.
Oh, it was okay. So it was like your rubber knife or okay.
Yeah.
Training aid.
Training tools.
Yeah.
What's in there? Training aids. Okay.
Little cardboard tubes with an electronic device on it. It looked like a bomb.
Well, it was cardboard because the way they scan that, it turns colors depending on what it's made. Yeah. So if you had an apple or like a banana in there, then they would have been crazy because it looks like C4.
Tape a bunch of bananas together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do it. Just let me know how it goes.
Hey, if you got a long layover, man, maybe try it.
just so you know, on the way back, I literally cut it into pieces and spread it out through the bags because I was like, I don't think I'm going to try that on the way back. My luck, they honestly missed my baton. I had my ASP baton quite a few years ago when I went down to Florida to do the OP, the original official partner class, the very first one at the American Police Hall of Fame Museum. I was out in Buffalo doing the ASP instructor recertification, and that I flew from Buffalo to Orlando. Forgot I had it in my bag. They didn't catch it until the Orlando TSA and flying back to New York. And then they pulled it out of the bag and they're like, "Is this yours?" I'm like, "That's where it went."
Oh, it was in your carry bag.
It's on my carry. So I carried it from Buffalo to, exactly. I carried it from Buffalo to Orlando and they didn't catch it on the way there. So that 95% is dead on, Barrett.
Yeah. And that's
bomb and ASP.
Right. And look, they catch guns every single day, but it's people who don't realize they still have a gun in their bag. And that actually almost happened to me one day. It was my busiest month that I've ever had in training. This was 2012, December 2012, and I was flying out to Jacksonville to go buy a Forerunner. And on my way out, I'm sitting there trying to put my medical kit in my backpack, and it's not going in my backpack. And I'm like, what's preventing it from going in here? So I reach in there, and sure enough, there's a bag with a Glock 19 in it from like 2 weeks before that. And I was that close from being that guy, right? Yeah. And it's and I'm pretty cautious about always checking my bags, but that's how confident I was that there was not anything in there. But it's that's the firearms, that's the weapons that they're catching. It's the people who are unintentionally actually bringing them in there, and people
and they throw the book at them.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
and they really don't throw the book at them. You know,
Yeah.
thankfully they hit them with a ridiculous fine,
Fine.
you know, but
Mhm.
criminally they don't charge them typically. You know, what I've seen in the past is they hit them with a civil fine. So rather than the person, you know, making the mistake and ended up becoming a felon, you know, what they'll do is hit them with a civil fine, and that civil fine's like up to $10,000.
Yeah,
And
it's
so if
crazy.
you have a gun, you can count on they're going to fine you $10,000.
yeah, one thing that's been, you know, we can discuss the necessity of this and or the constitutionality of it, but in the last 2 years, I've seen a lot more signage and, you know, big posters and banners that say, remember, no firearms or parts in through security. And so that, I think that's been good. You know, I don't necessarily agree with the, you know, the rule, but at least they're informing more people at a point in time in the venue to where, oh crap, they can go back to their car or whatever and not find themselves in line with the guy hitting the air horn, you know.
We
So,
started with safety, and I know we wanted to touch on the article that you wrote for guns.com.
oh, that's right. That's right.
I've written maybe 2 or 3 articles for them over the years, so I was you know, humbly surprised to see that, and glad that you're doing articles for them. Do you write a lot for guns.com?
That was my first article for
Okay.
them. And so, you know, I'll be doing a training article for them once a month right now.
Awesome.
And so, you know, we'll see some other stuff coming up. I got a, you know, long list of stuff that I'd like to get out there this year. I'll be doing some more articles for PDN, you know, personaldefensenetwork.com as well. You know, I kind of made a commitment going into 2024 that I would do more writing because I really have done way more video work, you know, than I have writing over the past
Right.
several years. I'm going to get back into that.
Good. That's
Cool.
awesome. Yeah. It's
Well, just give us the like 10,000-foot view of your article.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's on unintentional discharges, you know, which sometimes results in people getting hurt. Sometimes it results in somebody's hot water heater getting hurt, right? You know, and if you look at the data and you look at the studies, you know, most of the time that people have a gun that discharges when they did not intend for it to go off, most of the time it's just lackadaisical handling. You know, it's people who think the gun is unloaded when it's not, or, you know, they're messing around with it in their pocket in the McDonald's, you know, walk-in,
saw
or
that one.
right. It's like you saw that one, but there's been several cases like that. Somebody's playing with the gun in their pocket. So I mean, that leads to that kind of stuff, you know, and that's where a lot of it comes through. Somebody's getting ready to clean their gun, or they're cleaning their gun in their house, and they end up making that mistake. And that's where some of it is, but there's also, you know, human factors that come in play as well. And a lot of times the unintentional discharges, you know, are a result of something else. And so in the article, you know, I went through 3 different types of involuntary situations where guns can go off and have gone off. You know, one just simply being loss of balance, right? Somebody walking around, and the analogy I gave is hunting. Somebody's walking around in the woods, their fingers on the trigger, and, you know, they lose their balance or slip or coming down the stairs or something like that. And that loss of balance as they, you know, begin to tension up in that hand causes that gun to go off. You know, it's easy with enough pressure, you know, on the trigger.
Yep.
And then
Sympathetic response. Yeah.
right, the sympathetic response is, you know, is classified as something different. That's something I also talked about in the article, and I showed a video in the article, you know, where a police officer is, in fact, it was 2 officers that were trying to gain control of a suspect, and the suspect had a gun as well. So one of the officers had his gun out. They're trying to gain control of the suspect with his gun, and the suspect's gun ended up going off, and you can't really see what caused it. You know, we can make assumptions on it. It was probably some sort of, you know, sympathetic response, you know, during that situation. But what you can see is the officer's finger, you know, inside the trigger guard on the trigger of his firearm, you know, and he's also pointing it, you know, at his partner or his partner's arm at the same time. And his partner's yelling at him about his finger being on the trigger. And so I decided to show one, you know, that didn't result in the officer, you know, discharging the weapon, but that sympathetic response where we're trying to do something really hard, you know, with one hand, and all of a sudden we're kind of putting that same tension into that opposite hand. And that is definitely something that has come up over the years, you know, and even just in the fingers themselves. Y'all remember the old remote switch, you know, for the Surefire flashlights that they put it in the grip control. where would have issues where somebody's really kind of pulling back hard on that middle finger. Well, if their finger was also in line with that trigger, they may also have that same response coming back on that finger. And so I talked about those sympathetic, involuntary discharges in the article. And the one other thing that I spoke about was the startle response or startle reaction, where somebody's fingers on the trigger and they're caught off guard by something and, something surprising, and just that instinctive startle reaction causing them to come back, gripping down hard on it, discharging the gun. And the example I used in that one was, I also posted the video about it, was Lafayette, Indiana. You had officers that went in, they cleared an apartment or kind of a room, almost like a studio. They went in, they cleared the area, and there was a dog the entire time, in a kennel, and the dog's just going crazy, going crazy, going crazy. Well, the dog ends up forcing its way out of the kennel. It like runs up and, attacks and kind of bites one of the officers. Well, when that happened, that startle reaction, he ends up discharging his gun and shot his partner in the back.
Oh.
Thankfully she survived it. She recovered, but it was that startle reaction that happened. And so, all three of those different types of involuntary issues that can come up can also easily be mitigated. And y'all have seen it on the range. We've talked about it in the past, but so many people just, they may float that finger around that trigger or think just because it's outside the trigger guard that it's safe. Whereas all three of us teach that if you're not shooting, that finger not only needs to be outside of the trigger guard, but it needs to be higher up and straight into the frame of the gun. We got to give it somewhere, give it that default position. That way, if you have that startle reaction, that finger's going into the frame of the gun and not coming back and hitting the trigger. And so we really need to tie that back into, those that aren't teaching that in training. That really, really needs to be taught in training.
Yeah.
I think it's important too that people, they put a lot of emphasis on the tactile reference and not relying on visual stimulus to see it.
Yes.
But remembering what that feels like.
Exactly.
And I think with position and extension, whatever, it's like, now remember what that feels like consciously remember what that feels like. And I think it's more repeatable than
right.
In those stressful situations. At least that's what I believe anyhow.
Well, I'll use
cut you off, Matt. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. You're good. I use that analogy when you're driving down the road after you've practiced enough and you've the myelinization of the neural pathways and it's in rote memory. You put your foot on the brake if something runs in front of you. You don't have to look down. You don't look down to look at the brake. All right. So that kind of same concept. You get your finger on the side of the indexed high, and you go pick up a drill that has a trigger, and you're like, well, that's interesting. Or you pick up the gas pump and you're like, well, that's interesting.
Well, unfortunately, you have to look up from your phone to see the thing that you have to hit the brake for nowadays. So,
so I tell them that you've arrived if you pick up a drill or a gas pump and your fingers like this, because I'd rather do this on everything and a gun than not do this on a gun.
Oh, and gun guys wear that like a badge of honor, man. I see people standing like with their hand in their pocket, but their fingers straightly indexed along the seam of the, yeah, that's a thing, man. But it is something that you have to be disciplined and you have to take the time to learn it because it's not natural. Like this is natural. This ain't natural.
Well, it's not. And it's, and over the years, teaching people to have the finger higher than the trigger guard is also not something that is routinely taught across the board.
Yeah.
It's just always been accepted. As long as your finger's not on the trigger, you're good. Well, that may be good some of the time, but it's not good when we've got the other things that come into play.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the evolution of design too, like even with 1911s, revolvers in 1911s, most trigger guards are far enough to where it probably is okay that it's straightened off the trigger so long as they're on the trigger guard. But as the polymer guns became more prolific and then bigger trigger areas for people with gloves and stuff, it's not sufficient. So getting it high above is definitely something that everyone should teach.
Well, and I always like to give that mindset that if we have one way to handle a gun and that works for the majority of guns, we're less likely to have that issue, right? It's kind of like the old revolvers where they put their finger on the trigger and that was fine. But then when NYPD upgraded to Glocks, they started having, unintentional discharges left and right because of the sympathetic response, startle reaction, et cetera, because that finger was on the trigger. And go from a 12-pound trigger to a 5.5-pound trigger, then that's problematic. So, have one position where it'll work across the major majority of guns, and it might stand the test of time for the next type of gun that comes out. Just makes sense.
Were you the one that told me that the corrections department in New York used to check the gun clear by looking down the barrel? Was that you that told me that?
Yep.
See, now there is something somebody somewhere should say, well, I used to teach this, and then I realized it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if y'all watched the Hannah Gatera trial. She was the armorer from Rust. I don't know if y'all caught any of that. But
muzzle
I
at the
didn't.
judge. You talking about
yeah,
the muzzle
well,
at the judge?
I'm going back to just her being an armorer.
Yeah.
At one point, somebody witnessed her kind of doing the same thing of like looking, turning it back on a single action revolver to see if it was unloaded.
Yeah,
Goodness.
there's a better way to do that.
There is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, excellent. So tell us what
Dan.
you got. I'm cutting you off all over the place, Matt. I
Yes.
apologize. I had a cup of coffee late in the day, and it's
You're hyper.
yeah, it's nothing personal.
No, I was just saying we're coming to the end. So Barret, why don't you let everybody know how they can reach out to you, how they can get some training with you and learn more about you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find me on most of the social media. I'm not always active, but I am pretty good about responding to people when they hit me up on it. But I'm either under my name, Barret Kendrick, or Bearco Training. YouTube's Bearco Training. I think Instagram is Barret Kendrick. And you can hit me up on Facebook the same, or LinkedIn, whatever on that. Website is bearcotraining.com, and I'd love to be able to help out with training if you're in my area, or if you're in one of the areas where I am running classes, over the next several months.
Very cool.
Sweet. And you can find his classes on the PDN Training Tour site. So
Yep,
pdntrainingtour.com.
Updated. I need to personally update it, but yes, you can find.
Yeah,
my
I think
training
my
classes.
picture for my class is Barret, or I'm sorry, is Derek right now. I think is the pictures are a little bit goofy on there, but yeah, it needs to be updated. But
No, definitely so. And I need to send over information. In fact, while we're just sitting here, I just got a text from Rob, about that, as well as making sure I get all the classes over on the calendar. But yeah, if you're not familiar with the personaldefensenetwork.com training tour, it is a pretty cool tour with some great instructors that are certainly teaching from everywhere, from Mexico or in the US, from the West Coast to the East Coast. I don't know if anybody's got anything going on in Canada. I don't know how much they like the guns up there, allow the guns up there.
Hey.
maybe intuitive defensive bow and arrow, maybe.
That's right. Maybe so.
Rock slinging.
Yeah, as long as we call it fox hunting, I think we can kind of make something happen with certain types of guns, maybe BB guns or something, Red Riders. But yeah, a lot of great opportunities, not just with myself, but, with plenty of other instructors out there as well, teaching everything handgun, rifle, in, CQB style, or, pushed out all the way out, stretching it across, several hundred or 1,000 yards or even further.
Yeah, Wyotech's doing a lot of long range stuff, right?
What's that?
Wyotech.
Yeah, Wyotech,
Yeah.
Jason Quattro, he's definitely doing some long range stuff, and a great guy to go visit. I believe he's hosting me this year as well. We just got to get the date actually concreted in, but I'm pretty sure I'll be out in Wyoming this year teaching.
Cool.
Very cool.
Well, Matt, what do you have coming up class wise?
Oh goodness. Taser. So as a Taser master instructor, I've got a bunch of classes going around. We're currently the only one teaching that around the country right now. I've got Saber pepper spray. I'll be out actually at a USCCA headquarters at the end of next month after the Girl in a Gun conference. I'll be teaching at the Girl in a Gun conference in Colorado, and then flying from there to Wisconsin to certify all the USCCA instructors at USCCA headquarters under the Saber pepper spray brand. And then still doing the UTM stuff, and
Cool.
and then obviously the New York classes all over New York State, law enforcement, Leo's security guard classes all over New York State. So, but yeah, what about you?
Cool. Yeah, I've got PDN Training Tour dates coming up, as well as a few local ones. The tour dates I've got some in Maryland and in Delaware and very east, like almost close enough to where I could almost hit New Jersey with a rock, eastern Pennsylvania.
There you go.
But you can see that schedule on triggerpressersunion.com, or the PDN Training Tour dates specifically on pdntrainingtour.com. But
Awesome.
that's what I got going on.
Cool.
Well, Barret, it was a pleasure having you on the show. I apologize for not having you sooner. I don't know how that happened, but nevertheless, here we are. And I personally want to thank you for your mentorship, man. I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate the time that you've put into my development.
No, absolutely. And I can reflect that back to you because there's definitely things that I have learned from you along the way as well. So no, I definitely appreciate both of y'all. I'm glad to be on, and hopefully we don't go that long before we get to talk live again.
We'll make it happen.
Yeah. Stay safe.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right, have a good one.
Meet the Pressers is brought to you by Mantis X. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training, makers of CERT training products. Saber Red. Saber Red has been making men and women cry since 1975. Meet the Pressers is also brought to you by these fine companies, shows, and organizations. Thank you.
Make sure to check us out on all the social media platforms, on television, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV, all the audio platforms, as well as all of the other YouTube, Gunstreamer, etc.
Watching Meet the Pressers.